toxic work environments. We are hearing more and more about them. Check us out to learn how to spot them, what they really are, and what you can do to get through your day at work. Today, we are here to discuss toxic work environments. Now, I've owned my own business for over 20 years, and I've created such an amazing environment that I forget people go to work every day not being able to be comfortable, to feel like themselves. They don't feel as if they belong. So I'm talking to Ariel Davis, who is going to talk to us about what exactly is a toxic work environment.
I think a toxic work environment is any environment in which you feel like your emotional safety, your physical safety, spiritual safety, all of those things are in jeopardy, whether that's because of leadership or because of toxic coworkers, just something that doesn't make you feel safe.
Do you think these environments are new in the sense that is it something that millennials are like really into, or has it always been around?
I mean, I can only speak for my generation and my own experience. I mean, we can look at the Industrial Revolution and understand that toxic work environments have been a thing. We've introduced labor laws since then, but I think it's probably always been a thing. It's just something that's a lot more insidious these days, a little bit harder to point to.
So what are some of the signs? If I'm showing up at work every day and I just hate it, right? But I don't really know why. What are some of the signs of a toxic work environment?
For me, it was things like unclear policies, or it could be gaslighting, making you feel like your professional credibility is called into question. It could be pitting employees against each other, and one of the biggest signs is that there's no explicit feedback channel to report if you're experiencing something that's making you feel unsafe or uncomfortable. So there's no human resources, or sometimes it can be that you have a human resources department, but you develop the understanding in the process of reporting that they're not necessarily there to protect you, they're there to protect the organization.
So you use some big terms in there that people may not be familiar with, because this sounds like an abusive relationship. And I know that I'm joking a lot, but I know that people go to work every day and they absolutely hate it, but they feel like they are stuck, right? They have to take care of their families, they have to take care of themselves. So what is gaslighting? If I have no idea what that is.
Gaslighting is when someone makes you believe that what you're experiencing is not actually the actual experience. So it could be something like somebody is talking down to you every day and you go report that to a superior, or you're talking to a coworker about it, or maybe you engage that individual directly and they make a bunch of excuses of why you're making that up in your mind, instead of that's actually what's happening. That person is using abusive language with you, or that person is micromanaging your time or your task or something like that. They will often attribute a different reason that puts the responsibility on you instead of on the behavior that they're exhibiting.
So how is this different from any other abusive relationship?
It's actually really similar. I think in sometimes what we see in intimate partner violence and domestic violence, you often people can't leave because they don't have the resources to leave. Like they may have a spouse that's the breadwinner. It's the same with the work environment. You're worried about how am I going to pay my bills if I have to leave here. And I also think it can be for somebody who's experiencing something like that for the first time, abuse in any form. It's kind of hard to pinpoint if that's actually what's happening. Although you know you have all these negative feelings, you're dreading going to work, you may not have the language to say, this person is exhibiting behavior that is actually harmful to me psychologically. Sometimes it's difficult to unpack those things, I think, just because people don't have experience with it. And often we attribute things that happen to us and take personal responsibility for things that aren't really our fault until we talk to other people who are experiencing the same thing. And then all of a sudden you realize, wait a second, I'm not alone. It's not me. It's this person or this leader or this manager or this coworker.
What do you think some of the biggest mistakes that leaders make in creating toxic work environments, or that not noticing that their employees are in a toxic work environment?
Um, Listening. I think I don't think leaders do a very good job of accepting critical feedback. I think it can get to a point in professionalism to where you're no longer listening to your subordinates. So organizations evolve and change. That means the nature of positions change. That means the nature of the work changes. And sometimes people are so attached to the old way of doing things that they shut down people's creativity and their innovative ideas for how to improve things. Or often it's an ego thing. They just don't have the self esteem to receive critical feedback from subordinates, and they don't see it as valuable because they figure I'm running this show. It doesn't really matter what you think. You just need to do what I say, not as I do.
And see, I don't understand that because it's never worked really well. I mean, even if you have kids, for those of you who have kids, it just doesn't work very well. Plus, being a business owner, like you hire people to help them make you better, make your organization better. So I don't understand the ego.
Again, I think it comes back to maybe not having a healthy level of self esteem. And I also feel like in professional environments, we give people a lot less grace and room to make mistakes, especially when they are leaders. So I think many leaders may see it as a reflection of their inherent value when they don't know everything, or when somebody who maybe doesn't have as much experience has a better way of doing things, or maybe just a new way of doing things. I think it can be intimidating and trigger insecurities. And I think that that's fairly normal in leadership. I think the difference you see with good leaders and bad leaders is some people take that and they have a self awareness and they want to grow, and then others, insecurities are triggered and they just project that onto the people who are subordinate to them because there's a power dynamic. There's not really a way for a subordinate employee to push back that feels safe.
So we've been talking this entire time, but you haven't told us why you're the person to talk about toxic work environments. What what happened? What have you gone through? I mean,
A lot.
what's the worst thing you experienced?
Oh gosh. Heavy question. I think the worst thing that probably happened to me was the gaslighting, micromanaging. I experienced that. I worked for an organization to where I had to have every email I ever wrote had to be reviewed. Every anything I tried to do had to be reviewed and approved, which makes it really difficult to execute your duties because you're always waiting on somebody. Um, I've been asked to change clothes at work. I've had employees belittled in front of me. I've had bosses try to pit me against other employees by asking me, like, who told you that? Who gave you this information just so it could be used against that person? There's been a lot.
So I'm gonna dig a little bit.
Yeah.
So were your clothes inappropriate? I mean, because somebody might be watching this saying, I mean, maybe she needed to change clothes.
No. So it was interesting. The position that I'm referring to, I was working for a local nonprofit. And prior to that, I worked for the Mayor's Office of Resilience and Equity. So I think that that can give you a bit of understanding. Like, you have to have a certain level of professional dress. Now, when I took this other position, I did not just decide to go spend a whole bunch of money on a new wardrobe. So I essentially wore the same clothing that I wore at the mayor's office. So I felt like if it was appropriate for the highest level of local government, then it should have been appropriate for this local nonprofit.
So what about the emails? I mean, were there grammatical errors?
I may have had a couple of grammatical errors. And I do think that, but I'm a writer. That's something that I do professionally now. I work with Focus Black Oklahoma. I work for an international diversity and inclusion firm where a huge chunk of my responsibility is writing. I don't think that in order to draft an email, you need every single email reviewed, nor do I think it is a complete reflection of somebody's professionalism if they have one grammatical error in an email.
I agree. So you mentioned the Office of Equity and what was it?
Mayor's Office of Resilience and Equity.
Okay. What is the effect of a toxic work environment on a person who already belongs to a marginalized group? So you're a woman, you're a Black woman, you're a person of like all of the intersectionality that is contained in that. Do you think it's more?
I do think that marginalized groups can experience it to a higher degree. So maybe a Black woman's hair, maybe she decides she wants to wear box braids. I know that there is a local gas station company who does not allow people to wear braids and cornrows and different things like that, which is a protective hairstyle if anybody knows anything about natural hair. Um, Also, I do think tone policing is a very real thing for lots of women of color in the workplace, where a white man may be able to say something that is seen as like passionate and really caring about whatever issue is at hand. If a black woman says the same thing in the same manner, she's seen as being maybe problematic, maybe overly aggressive, maybe overly sensitive. So I think if you belong to a marginalized group, or you could just be a gay man who happens to show emotion. Maybe that emotion isn't anger, which is sometimes the only emotion we feel like men are supposed to have or allowed to have. Maybe he's trying to be more collaborative or a little bit more sensitive. That can be attributed to sexuality. So I do think that if you belong to a marginalized group, because of these stereotypes that we have, it can work against you in ways that it doesn't work against people who belong to the dominant culture.
Gotcha. So people working in these environments, what advice do you have? And like, how do you get through it? Because I can't imagine. That's probably a form of privilege, but I, because I've left I mean, when I did work for other companies, I have left companies like that. So it just, but I don't have kids. If I want to starve, I can starve. So what advice would you have for people in these environments?
For me, I would say if there is some sort of HR department or if there's a reporting system, try that route. You may try engaging the person directly if that's exhibiting abusive behavior, but if that doesn't feel safe enough for you and you know you are actually aware that that's what's happening, I would try to report it to somebody who is a higher up. Definitely make sure that you document everything that's happening. You can do that in written format. I have had friends who worked in the toxic work environments with me do it that way. In the state of Oklahoma, you can record people as long as one of the parties that's being recorded knows that it's happening. So what that means, if that's confusing for the audience, it means if there's three people and one of them is recording two people that don't know and they're not a part of the conversation, that is illegal. Don't do that. But if it's you and another person and that person's being abusive to you, it is within your legal right to record that conversation. That is something that I did when I was in my toxic work environment. It's something that I really don't like sharing with people, even though I'm sharing it with all of you now. But I think it's important, and the reason that it makes me uncomfortable to share that information, because I don't want people to be paranoid around me, right? At the same time, I knew in the position that I was in, the person had a lot of social capital. She consistently reminded me that she did, and that my reputation could be destroyed because she had so much more social capital. And that's another thing that happens, especially here locally in Tulsa. You know, if you work in government, nonprofit, or philanthropy, the circle is very small. So it's very easy if somebody is mistreating you, if you talk to other people, for them to say maybe don't say anything or be careful who you say what you say to, because it can come back and bite you and maybe ruin your professional trajectory going forward. So the reason I chose that route was because I knew I wouldn't be believed, because the power dynamic was not just so different in the actual work environment, but in the broader scale of having a network. This person's net was much bigger than mine.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that with us, because I know there are so many people who are feeling like this on a daily basis. If you are working in a toxic work environment, hopefully now you have better language for it. Hopefully you understand more, and just know that you are not alone. Toxic work environments are commonplace in today's world. Hopefully you heard a lot of tips, you know more about it. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments, and let's continue to talk about this. This is Risha Grant with Two Works for You.